They say family is the only thing you can count on, but what if the people who share your DNA are the ones who want to see you bleed? I was standing at an airport gate, 3,000 miles from my home in New York, when I realized the healing trip my parents and siblings had planned was actually a meticulously designed trap to erase my existence. In just 60 seconds, I went from a grieving granddaughter to a woman with no passport, no phone, and no way home, all while my own brother watched me with a chilling, triumphant smirk. I couldn't believe the people I loved had lied and backstabbed me just to get their hands on an inheritance they didn't earn. It was the most shocking and humiliating moment of my life, a public shame display that left me feeling like absolute garbage in a crowded terminal. But then, as I felt my world collapsing into a void of despair, a man whose name is synonymous with power and ruthlessness stepped out of the shadows. He didn't offer me a shoulder to cry on. He offered me a weapon disguised as a wedding ring, a shield of status and legal muscle that would change the course of my life forever. The truth is, they thought they were leaving me to rot, but they actually handed me the keys to a kingdom they could never even dream of entering. What happened next wasn't just a comeback. It was a cold-blooded, strategic vengeance that would make them regret the day they ever thought I was weak. A billionaire whispered a proposal that sounded insane, but in that moment of total betrayal, it was the only thing that felt real. If you've ever been cheated by the people who were supposed to protect you, you know that justice doesn't come to those who wait. It comes to those who take it. Stick around because I'm about to show you exactly how I turned a family war into a masterclass of karma and payback. They say blood is thicker than water, but that day at Heathrow, blood felt like ice water running through my veins. After Grandma Rose's funeral, my family promised a healing trip, but as I reached for my bag at the gate, it was gone. My brother had my passport, my sister had my phone, and they were both wearing these chilling, identical smirks. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a cold, calculated ambush that left me standing there, completely hollowed out. I watched them board the flight back to New York while I stood paralyzed, realizing they had canceled my return ticket behind my back. The humiliated feeling of being backstabbed by the people I shared Sunday dinners with was a physical pain, like a knife between my ribs. People were staring, whispering as I pleaded with the gate agent. But I had no ID, no money, and no way home. I couldn't believe that my own flesh and blood could treat me like disposable trash in a foreign country. Every family betrayal has a tipping point, and as the gate closed, I realized this wasn't just a petty argument over an inheritance. This was family drama turned into a survival horror story, a move to leave me legally absent long enough to take control while they headed for my life. I felt shamed for being so naive, for believing their lied promises of reconciliation after Grandma passed away. My self-worth was under fire, and the airport lights felt like a sterile interrogation room. I was a 38-year-old woman, Alyssa Sterling, reduced to a ghost in a terminal, and the infidelity of their loyalty was the ultimate cheated experience. My brother's last words were a whisper about me being too unstable to handle the stress, a narrative they were clearly building for a reason. The truth was staring me in the face. They didn't want me back in the States because I was the only thing standing in their way. But being backstabbed doesn't just hurt. It ignites a fire you didn't know you had. The terminal started to blur as the adrenaline hit, and I realized that if I didn't find a way out, I'd lose everything I'd worked for. This wasn't just about a flight anymore. It was about justice and finding a way to make them face the karma they so richly deserved. I stood there, clutching my empty hands, wondering how a healing trip had turned into a literal cage without bars. Then, through the crowd of travelers, a man in a charcoal suit stopped right in front of me. He didn't look like a traveler. He looked like he owned the air he breathed, radiating a quiet, dangerous power that cut through my panic. He watched me for a second, his eyes sharp and observant, as if he could read the family betrayal written all over my face. In that moment of total isolation, he offered a hand that didn't feel like a rescue. It felt like a weapon. He leaned in, and what he said next was so absurd it made me forget I was stranded. "You look like a woman who just realized her enemies are her own kin," he said, his voice a low, British-accented rumble. This was Julian Vane, a man whose face graced every financial magazine, a billionaire whose reputation for being cold was legendary. He wasn't offering a tissue. He was offering a deal that sounded like a fever dream born of my own desperation. He needed a stable wife for exactly 1 year to secure a massive merger, and he needed her right now. The terms were laid out right there on the terminal floor: a first-class ticket home, a $100,000 signing bonus, and a luxury flat in Mayfair. Silas, his lawyer, didn't need my phone. Julian's security quickly verified my identity through airline records and CCTV. The bonus wasn't cash in my hand. It was a wire set up in escrow to be released the moment we landed. It felt like payback was being handed to me on a silver platter, but I realized I had absolutely nothing left to lose. I couldn't believe I was actually considering it, but the thought of my family's faces when I showed up was too good. This was my chance at reclaiming my life and finding the justice that was currently being stolen from me at 30,000 feet. Julian didn't ask for love. He asked for a performance, a shield against his own board of directors who viewed him as a reckless widower. It was a trade of self-worth for survival, and I was ready to sign. Silas handed me a pen, and as I signed Alyssa Sterling on that heavy, cream-colored paper, I felt a shift in the atmosphere around me. The betrayal I had just suffered became the fuel for a new kind of fire, one directed toward a goal of absolute vengeance. Julian looked at the signature, gave a curt nod, and told me that from this moment on, I wasn't a victim anymore. I was his wife, and in his world, nobody touched what belonged to him. We walked toward the private terminal, and for the first time in hours, I breathed without the weight of the family drama crushing my chest. I was moving from the cold floor of a public airport to the velvet interior of a billionaire's life, all in the span of an hour. The shocking turn of events was almost too much to process, but the sting of being backstabbed kept me grounded. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was a business transaction designed to facilitate my ultimate revenge. As the jet engines began to roar and we left the London skyline behind, Julian sat across from me, sipping an espresso and watching the clouds. He told me that his brother, Alistair, was the real threat, a man who would do anything to prove Julian was unfit to lead. It turns out, we were both fighting the same war, just on different fronts and with different stakes. He looked me dead in the eye and promised that by the time we landed in New York, the hunt would begin. The flight wasn't just a luxury escape. It was a war room where Julian laid out the brutal reality of his own family betrayal. His brother was leaking fake stories to the press, trying to paint Julian as a man drowning in grief and unable to make decisions. My role was to be the anchor, the picture of elegance and stability that would silence the whispers and secure his seat at the head of the table. It was a strategic marriage, a high-stakes game of chess where I was the most important piece. I told him about my own loving family and how they had lied to get me out of the country so they could move on Grandma's estate. Julian didn't look sympathetic. He looked impressed by their ruthlessness, which only made me realize how dangerous my situation really was. He explained that my family's plan wasn't just to leave me stranded. It was a setup for something much more permanent and damaging. We weren't just two people on a plane. We were two casualties of war planning a massive vengeance strike. "They didn't just want your passport, Alyssa," Julian said, his voice dropping to a chill that matched the high-altitude air outside. "They wanted your absence to be documented as a disappearance or a breakdown." The shocking realization hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just being greedy. They were being predatory. This was about payback, but it was also about making sure they never had the power to hurt me, or anyone else, ever again. The truth was far uglier than a simple stolen inheritance. We spent the hours over the Atlantic drafting our public narrative, ensuring every detail of our whirlwind romance was airtight and believable. I felt my dignity returning with every line of the strategy we built, transforming from a victim into a partner in a global power play. Julian's lawyer, Silas, was already making calls, setting up the legal minefield that my family was about to walk into blindly. It was justice in the making, and the scent of it was better than the expensive champagne in my glass. Being backstabbed by your parents and siblings changes your DNA. It makes you realize that loyalty is a luxury you can no longer afford. I watched Julian work, realizing that this man was my only ally in a world that had suddenly turned its back on me. Our partnership was forged in the fire of betrayal, making it stronger than any bond based on mere affection or hollow words. I was learning that reclaiming your power requires a level of coldness that my family had taught me well. As we neared the New York skyline, the city lights looked like a grid of possibilities where I would finally get my justice. Julian turned to me, his expression unreadable but his intent clear. The moment we stepped off this plane, the trap would be set. I wasn't the scared woman from the airport anymore. I was a woman with a billionaire's resources and a heart full of karma. But as we landed, Silas received a notification that changed the nature of our mission entirely. The news from Silas was a gut punch. While they flew back to New York, my family had already filed for an emergency conservatorship over me back home. They told the courts I was mentally unstable and had vanished in a fit of grief, while simultaneously hiring a London solicitor to challenge the updated will Grandma Rose had left with her solicitor. They were trying to seize Grandma's estate, including the historic manor in the Cotswolds that she had explicitly left to me. It was a shocking level of family betrayal that made my blood boil. They were telling everyone I was a danger to myself, using the fact that I was missing, the disappearance they caused, as proof of my supposed breakdown. I couldn't believe they had the audacity to use my forced disappearance as evidence of my insanity. This wasn't just a move for money. It was an attempt to strip me of my dignity and my legal rights forever. They wanted me locked away in a gilded cage while they picked my life clean like vultures. The infidelity of their lies was breathtaking. They had even forged messages from me to make it look like I was contemplating self-harm. My sister, the one I had shared all my secrets with, was leading the charge with crocodile tears for the local tabloids. I felt humiliated by the public spectacle they were making of my life, but Julian just tightened his grip on his phone. He saw this not as a tragedy, but as a tactical error they had committed by underestimating me. "They've played their hand too early," Julian whispered, a dark light flickering in his eyes as he looked at the legal documents. He knew that by trying to erase my existence, they had given us the perfect opportunity for a devastating counterattack. We needed to prove I was not only sane, but more powerful than they could ever imagine in their wildest dreams. This was no longer just about payback. It was about a total, scorched-earth policy of vengeance for what they tried to do. We spent the next day in a high-security suite, working with Silas and a team to secure enough key footage and records to win the emergency hearing. We found the HD security footage of my brother slipping my passport into his jacket, a shocking display of premeditated cruelty. The evidence was mounting, a mountain of the truth that was about to collapse right on top of their greedy, lying heads. My self-worth was no longer tied to their approval. It was tied to their inevitable downfall. The deeper we dug, the more we realized how long they had been planning this, even before Grandma Rose had taken her last breath. It was a family drama of Shakespearean proportions, fueled by a jealousy that had simmered under the surface for decades. I realized then that justice wouldn't be enough. I wanted them to feel the same isolation and fear I felt at that airport. As the sun rose over New York, I knew the first emergency hearing was only 24 hours away. To beat them, I had to be perfect, a vision of competence and grace that no judge could possibly mistake for unstable. Julian brought in a world-renowned forensic psychiatrist for a grueling, same-day expedited evaluation of my mental state. We documented every bank statement, every professional achievement, and every rational thought I'd had since the moment I was backstabbed at the gate. It was about building an ironclad wall of justice that no lie could ever penetrate or crumble. The airport footage was the smoking gun, a display of premeditated cruelty that would turn their concern into a criminal conspiracy. I watched the screen, seeing myself looking lost and terrified. and felt a surge of vengeance that nearly took my breath away. They thought they were burying me, but they didn't realize I was the one holding the shovel. We had secured enough to win the emergency hearing, and that was all we needed. We prepared a dossier that detailed their own financial struggles, proving their motive was pure, unadulterated greed rather than sisterly love. My brother's gambling debts and my sister's failing boutique were all laid bare, providing the context for their desperate betrayal. This wasn't a family trying to help a grieving relative. This was a pack of wolves trying to secure a payday. The truth was going to be a bitter pill for them to swallow in open court. The night before the hearing, Julian sat with me, going over my testimony until my voice was steady and my gaze was lethal. He reminded me that karma isn't something that just happens. It's something you manufacture through precision and cold, hard facts. I felt a strange connection to him, a shared understanding of what it means to be hunted by the people who should have loved you. My dignity was returning, not as a gift, but as something I had fought tooth and nail to reclaim. I looked at the photos of Grandma Rose, remembering how she always told me I was the strongest of the lot, even when I didn't believe it. Her death was the catalyst for their greed, but her legacy would be the foundation of my revenge and my new life. I wasn't just fighting for a manor or a bank account. I was fighting for the right to exist without their shadow over me. The courtroom was going to be the stage for the most satisfying payback in history. When the morning of the hearing arrived, I dressed in a suit that was a literal armor of success and power. Walking into that courthouse, I didn't feel like the woman who had been humiliated and abandoned just days before. I felt like a storm that was about to break, and Julian was the thunder rolling right behind me, ready to strike. The doors opened, and for the first time, I saw my family's faces turn from smug to terrified. The courtroom was silent as Silas began his opening statement, laying out the timeline of my disappearance with surgical, heartless precision. My mother tried to interrupt with a sob, acting the part of the heartbroken parent, but the judge quickly silenced her with a sharp look. I sat there, a portrait of calm, while they were forced to listen to the recording of the call they made to cancel my ticket. The shocking silence that followed was the first taste of justice. Then, the video played. The grain shifted to high definition, showing my brother's smirk as he held my passport like a trophy. You could see the moment I realized I was alone, the sheer panic on my face, and the cold way they walked away without looking back. The judge's expression shifted from neutral to disgusted, and I knew the tide of family betrayal was finally turning against them. It was the ultimate payback, delivered in front of the very officials they tried to manipulate. Silas then presented the psychiatric report, which described me as exceptionally lucid, highly competent, and remarkably resilient. He contrasted this with the forged documents my family had submitted, pointing out the crude inconsistencies that proved they had lied under oath. The humiliated look on my sister's face was worth every second of the fear I had endured in that terminal. They had tried to paint me as a ghost, but I was the most solid thing in that room. "This isn't concern," Silas told the judge, his voice echoing like a gavel. "This is a coordinated attempt to commit fraud and kidnap a woman's life for financial gain." The word fraud hung in the air, a heavy promise of the karma that was about to descend upon my entire family. I watched my father shrink into his chair, finally realizing that the daughter he had abandoned was now the one holding his fate. My self-worth was no longer a question. It was a proven, documented fact. The judge didn't even take a recess. She denied the conservatorship immediately and issued a blistering reprimand that left my mother trembling. She referred the case to the district attorney for potential charges of theft, fraud, and filing false police reports, making their betrayal a matter of criminal record. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a sense of reclaiming my soul from the wreckage of their greed. This was the vengeance I had dreamed of, but it was only the beginning of their fall. As we walked out of the courtroom, my family tried to approach me, their faces twisted into masks of desperate, fake apologies and pleas. I didn't say a word. I just walked past them, flanked by Julian and Silas, as if they were nothing more than static on a screen. The shamed whispers of the gallery followed them out, marking the end of their social standing and the start of their legal nightmare. I was free, but I had one more role to play in Julian's world. Returning to the Vane estate wasn't just about hiding, it was about taking my place as the strategic powerhouse Julian needed to win his own war. His annual charity gala was falling apart under his brother Alistair's subtle sabotage, and I knew exactly how to fix it. I used my years of experience in high-end event planning to turn a looming disaster into a masterclass of elegance and influence. This wasn't just about a party. It was about proving that our marriage was the ultimate power move. I redid the entire guest list, bringing in contacts my family never even knew I had, and created an atmosphere that screamed stability and success. Julian watched me work with a look that wasn't just professional anymore. It was a burgeoning respect that bordered on something much deeper. We were no longer just a contract. We were a team, a unified front against anyone who dared to think we were weak. My dignity was shining through every decision I made, casting a long shadow over Alistair's petty schemes. The night of the gala, the room was buzzing with the story of our whirlwind romance and our recent legal victory against my unwell relatives. I stood by Julian's side, a vision in emerald silk, greeting the very board members who had been ready to vote him out. We were the personification of justice and grace, making Alistair's attempts at a smear campaign look like the desperate rants of a loser. The shocking success of the evening was the final nail in the coffin of his planned coup. Every time Alistair tried to corner a donor, I was there with a smile and a fact that highlighted Julian's brilliant leadership and our shared vision. I was playing a high-stakes game of social chess, and I was winning every single round without breaking a sweat. The family drama on Julian's side was being dismantled by the very woman my own family tried to destroy. It was a beautiful, symmetrical payback that made my heart race with a new kind of excitement. By the end of the night, the board of directors had pledged their full support to Julian, citing the remarkable influence of his new wife as a key factor. I had secured his empire, and in doing so, I had secured my own place in a world where I was finally valued. The vengeance against Alistair was silent but absolute, leaving him isolated in a room full of people who no longer believed his lies. We had turned a fake marriage into a real fortress of power and mutual protection. As the last guests left, Julian took my hand, not for the cameras this time, but because he didn't want to let go. He admitted that he had never seen anyone handle a room, or a crisis, with the level of poise I had displayed. The betrayal we both faced had brought us together, but the victory we shared was building a foundation for something neither of us expected. We were two broken pieces that had finally found a way to fit together perfectly. The board demanded a formalization of our union to ensure there were no legal loopholes Alistair could exploit in the future. We sat down with Silas to draft a new, ironclad marriage agreement, but this time, the terms felt different, less like a cage and more like a pact. We were protecting each other now, building a legal and emotional wall that would keep our toxic families at a permanent distance. My self-worth was being reinforced by a man who saw me as an equal, not a victim or a tool. As we stood in the quiet registrar's office, the words we spoke felt heavier than the ones we'd planned back on the private jet. The infidelity of our past relationships was replaced by a strange, new loyalty that neither of us had ever experienced before. I looked at Julian and saw a man who had been as lonely as I was, despite his billions and his power. This was reclaiming our right to be happy, even if the start of our journey was rooted in a desperate, wild betrayal. We spent the following weeks blending our lives, not for the public eye, but because we genuinely enjoyed the company of the only person who understood the cost of vengeance. I moved my things into the manor, and for the first time, it felt like a home rather than a temporary refuge from the storm. The justice we had won in court was being supplemented by a quiet daily peace that was the best kind of payback. We were no longer playing roles. We were becoming the people we were meant to be. The whispers in the press changed from scandalous to the city's new power couple, a transformation that drove my brother and Alistair absolutely mad. Every public appearance was a reminder of their failure, a constant, glittering piece of karma that they couldn't escape or ignore. I felt a sense of dignity that was unshakable, knowing that I had built this life from the ashes of their attempt to ruin me. The truth was that we were better together than we ever were apart. Julian started opening up about his late wife, and I shared the stories of Grandma Rose that I had kept locked away in my heart for so long. Our bond was being forged in the quiet moments between the battles, making the fake part of our marriage feel like a distant, faded memory. The shocking reality was that I was falling for the man who had bought my freedom at an airport gate. It was a beautiful, terrifying development that made the stakes of our survival even higher. We were no longer just strategic partners. We were a family of choice, a sanctuary against the world that had tried to eat us alive. My family's betrayal had led me to the one place where I was finally safe, seen, and truly respected for who I was. As we prepared for the final legal settlement regarding Grandma Rose's estate, I knew that I wasn't just walking into a meeting. I was walking into the end of my old life and the beginning of a magnificent, permanent future. The day of the final settlement arrived, and my family showed up in their Sunday best, trying to look like the victims of a big misunderstanding. They had seen the news of my billionaire marriage, and suddenly remembered how much they loved and missed their dear Alyssa. It was a shocking display of greed that made me want to laugh and cry at the same time, seeing their transparent attempts at manipulation. They didn't want me. They wanted a piece of the power they had so foolishly tried to throw away. My mother approached me with tears in her eyes, talking about family loyalty and how Grandma Rose would have wanted us to be together. I looked her in the eye and felt nothing but a cold, hard clarity that was the result of their own backstabbed cruelty. I told her that family is a verb, not a noun, and their actions at the airport had permanently revoked their right to use that word. The humiliated look on her face was a final, necessary boundary that I had to draw for my own sanity. My brother tried to apologize, claiming he was under a lot of pressure, but I cut him off before he could finish his pathetic, scripted lie. I handed him a folder containing the evidence of his gambling debts and a formal notice of a restraining order. This was justice being served cold, without the sugarcoating of blood is thicker than water that they had used to manipulate me for years. My self-worth demanded that I leave them in the past where they belonged. "You didn't just steal my passport," I told them, my voice steady and echoing in the ornate meeting room. "You tried to steal my mind, my rights, and my future, and for that, there is no forgiveness, only consequences." The shame silence that followed was the most honest moment we had ever shared as a family, a final acknowledgement of their total defeat. I was reclaiming my name and my legacy, and they were left with nothing but the bills for their failed scheme. Julian stood by my side, a silent, powerful reminder of the world they could never enter, and the woman they would never control again. We signed the papers that officially transferred Grandma Rose's entire estate to me, including the Cotswolds manor they had worked so hard to steal. The vengeance was complete, not through violence, but through a total and absolute severance of the toxic ties that had bound me. I was no longer their daughter or sister. I was a woman who had outplayed them at their own game. As we walked out, I didn't look back at the people who had abandoned me at a gate in a foreign country. I walked toward the car, knowing that the only family I needed was the one I was building with Julian and the friends who had actually stayed. The family betrayal was finally over, replaced by a fierce independence and a sense of peace I hadn't felt in decades. My life was finally my own, and the boundaries I had set were made of iron and reinforced with gold. The fallout for my family was swift and devastating. The fraud charges hit the papers, and their reputation in our small town vanished overnight. They were forced to sell their own homes to cover the legal fees and the damages the judge had awarded me for the emotional distress they caused. It was the ultimate karma, a slow-motion collapse of their greedy little world that I watched from the safety of my new life. I had achieved the kind of justice that most people only dream of after a betrayal. Alistair was ousted from Julian's company in a unanimous board vote, His career in finance effectively ended by the very scandal he tried to create for us. He was left with nothing but his resentment, while Julian's leadership was celebrated as more visionary and stable than ever before. Our vengeance was a success on every front, proving that the best way to beat a bully is to become their worst nightmare. We had turned a trap into a springboard for a global empire and a genuine, deep-seated love. I reopened my event planning business, but this time, it was an international powerhouse that catered to the elite, all from my beautiful office in the Cotswolds manor. I was no longer the woman who was cheated out of her inheritance. I was the woman who had redefined what it meant to be successful and free. My self-worth was soaring, and every new project was a testament to the resilience that my family tried so hard to break. I was living a life that was extraordinarily well, the ultimate form of payback. Julian and I decided to renew our vows, not for a contract or a board of directors, but for us, in a small ceremony in the garden Grandma Rose loved so much. We were surrounded by chosen family, the people who had actually supported us when the world felt like it was ending. The shocking journey from that airport gate to this altar was a reminder that sometimes the worst things that happen to you are just a detour to the best. The truth was that I had never been happier or more secure in who I was. I often think about that day at the airport and how close I came to letting their family drama destroy my spirit forever. But then I look at Julian, at my home, and at the career I've built, and I realize that the vengeance I sought was actually just a path to my own liberation. I am no longer a victim of a backstabbed plot. I am the architect of a life that is beautiful, powerful, and completely untouchable. The fire they used to try to burn me only made me strong enough to survive the storm. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been backstabbed by someone you trusted with your whole heart? Or have you witnessed a family drama that felt like it was ripped straight out of a thriller? How would you handle a situation where the people who are supposed to love you most become your greatest enemies? Don't hold back. Share your stories of betrayal, justice, or that sweet feeling of karma in the comments below, because your experiences might be the spark someone else needs to reclaim their own dignity. If this story resonated with you or gave you a new perspective on how to turn your pain into power, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications. You won't want to miss our upcoming deep dives into the psychology of vengeance and more shocking real-life accounts of people who became untouchable after being pushed to the edge. Stay tuned for more provocative insights that will help you navigate the complex world of family betrayal and emerge